3, 2, 1, action.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the January 19th work session of the Croton Harmon Board of Education to order. Recommended action that the Board of Education approves the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. We'll now move into instructional personnel. Recommended action that the Board of Education accepts the instructional personnel resignation of Janet Cook, special education teacher, for the purpose of retirement, effective end of day, February 28th, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? The motion carries. We'll now move into the consent agenda. Recommended action that the Board of Education approves all the items on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. All right, so we will now start our work session, and we'll start by turning it over to Denise Harrington-Cohen to give us a budget follow-up.
I have a very brief budget follow-up. We were anticipating the governor to release the budget by now. He actually has until February 1st. Nothing has been released at this point, so I have very little to update you with.
All
That
right.
concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Yes, so we will await to see what the executive budget is. Hopefully before February 1st.
Yes, please.
All right, so now I will turn it over to Superintendent Walker to get us going on our main work session for the evening.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here, both in person and remotely. I just wanted to say, as we begin tonight's conversation, how interested and excited I am about this opportunity that the board and that the entire team has tonight, and that we really have in front of us as a learning institution, as a school system. I think we can learn a ton about a system and what its beliefs are and what its culture values through how it experiences times of change. And I think as we're going to see tonight and going forward, this is unequivocally one of those times. And how we go about thinking through the challenges that GPT and artificial intelligence and predictive analytics will continue to bring to all of us, and to hopefully frame them as opportunities for enhancing teaching and learning. That's going to be one of the great opportunities of our time together as a team. So we look forward to beginning that process with some conversation this evening, and I'm happy to turn it over to our outstanding Director of Technology and Innovation, Dr. Jared Blair.
Good evening, everyone. So when I started this role last year and started developing my vision for this role, I reflected on my own experience as a teacher and as a supervisor of STEM at my former district, and thinking about technology committees. And I felt that my participation in technology committees fell out of place. I knew the technology, I implemented it really well, but I felt the conversation focused so much on the technology, but not enough on the why behind the selection of the technology. So when I started this role and began thinking about how could we shift our thinking around a technology committee, I came up with this idea of the innovation team, inspired by my title, right? Technology and innovation. So I had presented to the board last year about this idea, and we actually had our first 2 meetings in the spring of last year, and you'll see some agenda items up on the left-hand side of the screen here. We really took the opportunity to take a real analytical look at where the district was in terms of everything, really, not just technology, but just where we were and where we really wanted to be. And those conversations that stemmed from those 2 innovation team meetings, combined with the influences of Judy Wilson and our strategic planning pursuits, Bill Daggett and our participation in Learning 2025, and then our evolution of our 4 guiding questions, the innovation team has also evolved. And we are really taking on with the innovation team this year, a think tank model. So what is a think tank model? And actually, I'm sorry, I want to just highlight this opportunity with this shift in our thinking with innovation team and the think tank model, it really helps us to highlight the guiding question on risk taking. So any type of participation within this think tank model allows individuals, whether all stakeholders, right? Parents, teachers, students who participate in that think tank model, ideas to just really take some thoughtful risk taking. So what is this think tank model? I'll take you through the protocol. We start with any individual or group of individuals presenting their issue for innovation. So something that is thought-provoking, something that's producing some challenges, and something that we want multiple stakeholders within the system to produce some thinking around. Then we allow groups within the innovation team to have some individual think time. Then we proceed to step 3, which is clarifying questions just for those presenters. Then we have a group discussion. So the innovation team has gotten quite large, so we do break into smaller groups. For tonight's protocol, we'll actually utilize you as just one central group and have that discussion kind of out loud between everybody. Focusing on 4 major components: opportunities, challenges, questions, and suggestions, again, all surrounding that issue for innovation. We won't do step 5 tonight because we are one group, but if we had multiple groups, those groups would all come together, present their discussions, and then we would offer our presenters an opportunity to reflect on what they were presented with. What I'd like to stress about tonight's protocol is that we're not asking for answers tonight, right? There's no pressure on any of you here. It's really just generating some ideas around our issue for innovation this evening. So with that, I'm going to move our protocol to our presentation of the issue for innovation and give this over to Dr. Dubak and Ms. Fiorini, and they'll be presenting our issue for innovation tonight.
So our issue that we bring to you is actually really centered around the larger district guiding question: how will the Cork Harbin schools develop into a future-driven system? With the particular topic that we're talking about, the future is very much here, and we need to figure out what to do with it in order to make sure that it keeps moving us in the future-driven direction. So Erica is actually going to do a brief intro just to show you what this tool is. And you're welcome, if you're interested, to pull it up on your own computers if you want to play around with it as well.
So Chat GPT, you probably read about, it's in all of the newspapers or online newspapers, I guess it would be now. And it's something that was released just in November. And I'm having trouble with it, you know. Ta-da. In September, this was OpenAI and it looked different. So they've updated it and it's much more sophisticated now. I usually log in with Google. Sorry about that. Open new process.
It's a lot of pressure on your spelling.
Right? Too many I's in my name. So once you establish an account, it remembers all of the things that you've searched in the past. Next, okay. All right, so here we are. And on the bottom, you can give it whatever prompt you'd like. So if we started out, I could ask it, what is the role of the Board of Education in a public school? And I can't even see what I'm typing.
Yeah, no better. Here, I the control screen.
Okay, thank you. In New York. So it's thinking, and it will quickly search. It's not connected to the internet. What it's done is when they created the program, it scraped the internet and it's predicting the text of what would come next, following the words that you've entered. So this quickly spit out what the role of the Board of Education is in New York State. If you were to put this into, copy and paste it and put it into Google, it's not going to find this anywhere. It doesn't exist. It's original text here. You can ask it a follow-up question if you would like to. So if you've read that, is there anything that you would like more clarification on?
Curriculum.
Okay, so how can the Board of Education support curriculum? And if I wanted to, I could stop generating here if I said this is not what I was looking for. So I won't give you my opinion because that's something that eventually you will talk about. If I wanted to create a new chat and I wanted to move into something different, create or write a poem about, give me a topic. Trees. And you know what? We're gonna make it a 6-line poem because it needs to be that specific. Gonna think for a minute. Some of them take a little longer, and it also depends on how many people are using it at the time.
Oh,
And there you go. If you needed to write a poem, and maybe my poem needed to include a simile. It may not be the best poetry, but it's there.
No, I actually think it's pretty good. That's good.
So please include a simile. And I just said please to it. I'm not sure why.
have it. Maybe it will be nicer. Like
So it's
sentence.
added like sentinels, it added like a symphony, like anchors that quickly.
How about a tree haiku?
That's what I
You want
said.
Wow.
Inappropriate.
What if you needed to write an email?
I just read this from Denise.
So perhaps it's a starting point, but again, I'm not going to give you too many suggestions, but rather just to give you an idea of what this can do. So we looked at poetry, something that was more informational, and then an email. So it has many uses. And I think I'm done with this portion. You can play with it. I'm sure you'll come up with lots of different uses if you want to. So what we've done is to take a look at some real life examples, and then AI created the same situation. So the first one is, which school mission statement do you prefer, choice A or choice B? So if you take a quick look at that and figure out which one you think for a 21st century school is the best. Similar.
Which one do I think is best? Which one do I think is human generated?
Do best first. Which do you prefer? If you were to choose one of these that we had to adopt.
I think I prefer the one on the right.
Choice B.
A or B?
And, but I think that might just be because it's a little more terse.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
It is literally one long sentence. Yeah, that is my issue. Driving me nuts.
But mission statements often are.
It's an awful lot of commas in that one sentence.
So it's very similar in its presentation. Yes, lots of semicolon. In its presentation. So which one then do you think is human generated and which one is AI?
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think B is.
Choice B is a district in the county. And choice A is human generated. But if we think about the time that it probably took, right?
The choice B is a district in the county. Choice A.
Oh, I'm sorry, is AI.
Is
Yes,
AI.
that's what I meant to say. Thank you. Is AI. And if you think about how long choice B probably took to write versus choice A, and if you started with AI, where that might lead you. And then the next.
So a slightly different type of text, different question, who created it? So which one was human created and which one do you think was AI created?
Left
Yes,
is
the right.
AI. I think left.
Mixed reading. I was feeling right, but which one is right, Molly? Right is human or AI?
I think right is AI. I'm gonna be wrong.
No, I agree with you. I think right is AI. I think.
But honestly, it could be though. Think about AI, these AIs for artists, like they just mimic human artists. So it's not like they're totally making something from scratch. I just want to say it's not gonna like, we're not gonna be like a Wall-E future, yeah, but
I think they're both AI.
oh my God. it's tricky.
We're not that. Think-
So actually, the one on the right is human generated. It's actually a former
I was wrong.
student's artwork, and the one on the left is AI. This is the tricky one. One more example, and a little clip of a graduation speech. Who did it better? Similar topic, choice A or B.
Whose graduation?
Can't do it.
I think the one on the right is human generated, and I think it's better. Am I right?
Choice B.
Yeah.
What?
Sorry, yeah, I think choice B is.
Yeah.
You think choice B is what?
AI.
Human generated.
You think choice B is human?
Wait, actually, I don't know anymore.
I think B is AI.
I think B is AI too. That it's better.
Mixed review.
I think A is
I
AI,
feel like the A
and
one
I
kinda
think
sounds
B
like-
is human, and it's not for the reason you think. It's because there's a spacing error. That's what it is.
Actually, choice B is the AI. Choice A is actually from my graduation.
And don't feel bad because I got all three.
I thought you meant a student's graduation speech, and I thought the one on the left sounded too teachery.
Well.
That's fired.
I'll have you review my speech.
How do you do Philip Gibbs?
Beautiful speeches, Jeff, from the AI.
So I did a whole
Don't.
speech, and it's not half bad.
Good starting
So it's obviously, as you can see, it can be hard to tell at face value, you know, and thinking about how long it takes to create some of these things, you wonder, is there any potential value to starting with AI or using it to our advantage?
Quick question, will it give the same answer to every time?
No.
So if I asked it to write the graduation speech about individuality, I tried it 3 different times and it gave me 3 very different responses.
And there is a button I noticed, I haven't actually hit it yet, but I noticed it last time, it says regenerate. So I think if you're not happy with that, you can hit regenerate and it'll give you a different version.
But is it learning based on you or is it just random?
I think it's
Based on
point.
all of the users.
All of the users.
We're all
Right.
teaching.
Yeah.
Eventually, it's, I think will be based on just you. And the example that Bill Daggett gave is if you bring up your cell phone or even your email now, it knows how you write. And
Sure.
if you start in a certain way, like I notice if I say dear and I shorten Michael to Mike, even though the email address says Michael, eventually it just changes it to Mike because it knows that that's what I'm typically putting in. This, I think, is learning from all of us at this point and is not individualized, but that's the next phase that I'm sure will be here like tomorrow, because that's how quickly it's moving. This is the screen that you saw that was
I got it.
on the homepage on AI on Chat GPT. Some examples we've already done, the capabilities. Something I wanted to point out when I said this might be here tomorrow is that these things in the center column are new since September. So at the beginning of the year, I showed the faculty at the high school the last version of this. At that time, it couldn't remember what you said earlier in the exchange. We're here, we were able to add a follow-up question, like give me another example, add a simile. The last version couldn't do that. It also allows you to provide follow-up corrections if you didn't want something included and wanted something different. And it's supposed to be trained to decline inappropriate requests, although people, like everything, have found loopholes around that. That's all new. And as I already said, it doesn't access the internet, so that is considered to be a limitation, as well as when it scraped everything, it was pre-2021. So if there's something that's newer, it doesn't have that in its knowledge base. The loophole around that is if I were to cut and paste a news article and stick it in and say, please summarize this, it's just summarizing the text that's there, not necessarily searching the internet for it. So that's a way to get around the timeliness of the article that you're putting in.
I know Molly has tried using it with code to generate code
Oh,
and
yeah.
some other capabilities besides
Oh,
text too. that
Wait, it went away.
We didn't
Oh, sorry.
touch.
I just
but
tried to ask it what
it's possible.
Biden did last week and it didn't, it just said, sorry, I can't, my data doesn't go past 2021. And now it's giving me an error message saying, sorry, I can't complete the response. And also, yeah, I tried code with it. It was solid, but the thing about it is it didn't actually finish the code. Like it just started lagging and it stopped. So,
So it
I
can be
mean, I guess they'll
starting
work on
point
that,
to-
but yeah.
So that's a lot of information to think about. So we wanted to, part of the think tank protocols to have some individual reflection time. So we wanted to give everybody here an opportunity to do that in a sort of written conversation way. So this is a classroom activity that we often use, the Silent World Cafe protocol. So there's expo markers for everybody to grab. You can use any of the whiteboards around us. To spend a little time just jotting down what questions does this concept raise for you? What ideas do you have? And you can feel free to add on to other people's ideas, respond to one another in writing, or ask additional questions. There's markers from the garden.
You guys can.
It's so reminds.
Yeah. I got it.
But I knew how to spell.
Yeah, I'll set.
But in this
Yeah.
protocol, it's also important to remember that once you have an idea, you also need to read other, it's a silent conversation, so. So thank you for all of your thinking. I think sometimes it helps to get everything out before we start our discussion, so you can kind of focus on what's the most important pieces to you. So in the golden circle, we have an understanding of why this issue is important. And some of these quotes are from the readings that Dr. Blair put in his weekly report. And I think it's evident to all of us, but just to recap some of the important points, if this is potentially the signal of the end of writing assignments, which is sometimes where people's minds go automatically, then what are we doing in place of that? If we have all of these tentacles of education, and writing is one of those pieces that people are going to have their bare bones skills to do because of AI, how will this affect standardized testing, admissions, educational software? And finally, one of the most important is from the article about what did we learn from Plato, is that we cannot go back and just lament the skills that have been lost, but rather, what is this doing to make more complex skills necessary? And then how do we teach our students to develop those skills that are going to be necessary in this new world? Because we can't just police and control it because it's there. So how then do we harness it and make sure that we're preparing our students for the future? So we have an understanding of the why. Now, we also, I think, have an understanding of the what that we would like to accomplish. There's a lot there to read, but a couple that we would like to highlight is instill a sense of academic integrity in our students. So we're not operating from an idea of fear and control, but rather from an ethical standpoint. This has been the same since like Google, SparkNotes, the calculator, that app, I forget what it's called, where you can scan the math problem and it tells you how to do it. Okay, so all of these, everyone knows what it is. That all of those things are already here. This is another way that students could potentially use it unethically, but what do we do to instill that academic integrity in them? How do we develop valid ways for students to demonstrate their understanding and successful application of concepts? Could this actually increase rigor? And finally, developing intrinsic motivation and passion, which obviously is one of our guiding questions. We're not simply completing assignments for a grade. Some students may cheat because of a fear of failure. If they don't understand, there's not a growth mindset or room for failure. So if that's the case, what do we need to do to have them be intrinsically motivated? So those are the ones that we'd highlight for what we would like to achieve.
So the challenging part, how do we achieve that long list of what we want to achieve? And that's what we're coming to you ask for your feedback on how do we do this? So we created a few guiding questions to help. There's a lot that you could probably share your thoughts and feedback on. So a few guiding questions to think about are, how can we as a future-focused system avoid putting barriers up to control new technology and use it to push our thinking and abilities instead? How do we proactively position our students to utilize technology like this ethically, effectively, and in support of learning? How do we roll this out to students well? We know that they're aware of it. Some of them have used it already, but as an institution, how do we roll this out? And we use this example from a very popular text from 2005. Daniel Pink argued that abundance, Asia, and automation were the changing skills required for success then. So 18 years later, ChatGPT is here, maybe the fodder for his next book, but we have this another catalyst for change. How will it impact the educational system as a whole? We're not just thinking about assignments, replacing assignments, thinking bigger to the whole system and how it will change. And what will set students and our education system apart in a world where there's all of this abundance and automation? What's going to make our students stand out in this automated form. So they're just some guiding questions for thought for the next part of the protocol.
All right, so this is the fun part, right? So you've had the individual think time. We will now progress to step 3, which is clarifying questions for the presenter. This is probably the hardest step of the protocol, because at this point, we don't want to go into discussion mode. We want to just simply ask clarifying questions if you have any. Not required, of course, but if you have any clarifying questions for the presenters based on anything ChatGPT, or if we want to go back to our focus questions for clarification questions on this, we'll spend some time asking those right now.
Thank you for the opportunity. I guess my clarifying question is, and I'm not sure if you were quoting this piece, but you said it might signal the end of writing assessment.
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess my question is, why is that so? And does that have to be the case? Because the way I see it is, it might just be that writing assessment needs to be taught differently or evaluated differently.
So
Not that it replaces it.
the clarifying question, then yes, that it was a quote. And it exactly was a program that generates sophisticated text in response to any prompt you can imagine, may signal the end of writing assignments altogether, and maybe even the end of writing as a gatekeeper, a metric for intelligence, a teachable skill. So I don't, at this point, it's not whether or not we agree with that, but that's the information that's out there, and that's where some people's minds are going. That's the why. Why do we need to think about this? And you have a valid point, and that's a piece of the discussion for sure.
Go for Anna.
Oh, I would just like to, since we're kind of like refocusing on what the questions are gonna be, ask how this overlaps with our district's guiding principles, specifically the equity component, and whether this has been vetted to be equitable for all of our students.
I missed the first part of it.
Just to refocus on like the district's governing questions.
So how is it connected?
So
Yeah.
the question about focusing on equity
Oh.
for students, so in terms of vetting, right now, it's just a publicly accessible internet-based tool, so anyone theoretically who has access to the internet can use it. However, I think there's even some questions up here about equity and kind of a potential to
Well, I just have,
increase.
yeah, I have
inequity.
questions about inherent bias.
Yes.
Or question, it could increase in inequities, or does it have potential to reduce inequities?
Yes.
In another group that I was a part of discussing this, the concept of the college essay came up. And students who don't have access to college advisors, people who can tutor and coach them through the process, students who where English is not their first language, does it actually potentially help them gain access to tools that they might not otherwise be able to access? And I had never personally thought about it that way. I was operating more from a,
Right.
is this going to increase equity issues among students? So I think that's definitely part of the discussion, but right now it's just a publicly accessible tool that anyone who knows about it could theoretically access.
The other piece about equity is it could produce text that is biased, because if it is scraping information that is biased
Right.
already,
Mhm.
what it produces could then be something that is not going to be inclusive. And that is one of the limitations that they acknowledge.
A significant cautionary point that.
Well, I
Responses you
think
get.
a lot of this is in item 4, not item 3, right?
That's
So
the hardest
really,
part.
Right,
So-
and so I guess my clarifying question is with regard to the quote from, or the question that comes out of the quote from Daniel Pink. When we are talking about how will this impact the educational system as a whole? is our discussion that we will have to be focused on the educational system as a whole of the Croton Harmon Union Free School District, or the educational system as a whole, meaning larger, state, national? What are we being asked to talk about?
It's a very good clarifying question. I mean, obviously, we're most interested in the Croton Harmon impact, but I think it's hard to think about the Croton Harmon impact without also imagining what is college education going to look like, since we often talk about what we're preparing students for, what will jobs look like in the future. So I think you're going to naturally probably end up talking about both things as part of the discussion.
Any other clarifying questions, Josh?
What's the time frame? How quickly are you asking for answers about how to shift whatever needs to be shifted? I'm not getting to what needs to be shifted, but how soon do we need to know? Like, what's the horizon here?
I have a follow-up before you answer that.
I mean, if it's okay, I chime into this, like, just quickly, remember that the goal for tonight is no answers, right? We're not asking for policy. We're not asking for any type of specific direction, right? It's really just starting the discussion, because as Erica had mentioned, she presented this to the staff in June, right, of last year. And since then, this product has dramatically increased in its capacity. So this is happening faster than we could have ever imagined, right? And as you saw in some of the articles that we shared with you in the weekly last week, some schools have chosen to block, right, the product. Some schools are keeping it open. Reality is we could block it here, it's still going to be accessed, right? So I think just remember, don't feel too heavy in the responsibility here, because we're just trying to get the conversation generated, right? And your opinions are just as valuable as anybody else's within our system, so.
And as a follow-up to that, and kind of in line with what you just said, given the ever-changing nature of this and how rapidly it's changing, we can't think of it in terms of like making a decision about it and what it is today, because it will be something different tomorrow. So we have to think about it almost in parameters of how we're going to handle something that's constantly changing.
Right, and if we, go back to our protocol, we'll try to chunk our conversation. And obviously, we could talk about this for hours, right? But tonight we'll chunk our conversation to those 4 kind of areas. And again, for just takeaways in our initial thinking. So again, any clarifying questions for our presenters before we really dig into the discussion? Yeah.
Do we know are there just a multitude of entities creating similar tools? Like, is it just endless, or are there?
We've started to see some articles coming out about some other, like Microsoft and Google, I think were 2 that were named. as potentially developing.
Microsoft
Yes,
developed,
has something to do with this.
yeah, they invested, I think, like $10 million in this, in AI. So they're partly behind this, but they may be incorporating the article I saw into Bing. And then Google.
I read something about.
Bing is
Google.
still a thing?
They're hoping it will be
trying
again.
to revitalize that by adding this component, maybe it will.
Don't call it a comeback.
We've also seen the potential for like a paid version of this. There's some allusion to that, which also brings up more questions about equity and access to. That's not here yet. But it seems like this might become a business.
Yeah, well, there are definitely companies that are working on a similar AI technology, right? That it would be a
Monetizing it,
monetizing it.
Working on it.
OpenAI,
in Lots of
is
different
like
ways, and there's
committed
many
to.
companies out there that are already using this kind of technology, but they may not expose it to the public in the way that this organization has.
Do we feel ready to progress into the discussion portion of the evening?
Sure.
All right, so let's focus the first part of the discussion exclusively on the opportunities that this presents. Focusing and framing through these 3 questions. It could also be through the frame of the guiding questions of the district. But let's focus again on opportunities first.
We don't participate, right?
Correct. So at this point, Eric and Laura will take themselves out of the conversation and it will solely focus on the group here. And then they'll have the opportunity to reflect on everything at the end. So Josh, you want to start us off on
So,
opportunities?
as I think about this, I reflect on some of the areas where I struggled as a student and areas where I excelled as a student. And one of the areas where I really struggled as a student was with writing. It took a long time for me to be able to write in a way that was creative, as opposed to, if I was writing something that was nonfiction about a topic that I knew something about or that I'd researched, that was easy for me. But writing something that was fictional, made up, was like pulling teeth. And I just put myself back into the moment of like, what would I have done at that time? And of course, I would have used every single tool that was available to me to come up with ideas. I might not have used that. And that was actually what I learned to do, and how I got better at writing creatively was by looking at other things that I could use to sort of like spark my creativity. So I think about that a little bit because it sort of eliminates, it does create a sort of equity might create an equity for students who have trouble with that kind of, where they can present, well, here's the idea, but then they can get it into words, right? So I think there is that kind of it's a different kind of equity aspect, not just about language proficiency, but about, how they translate that into writing. But in a bigger sense, I sort of wonder whether it interrupts sort of some of the older tropes of having to regurgitate knowledge in the form of an essay. If that no longer will have quite the same kind of value, and basically allows us to know that really what we're focusing on is the critical thinking skills or the creativity or the collaborative skills or whatever skills we're talking about at the moment that actually led to the ideas behind, right? I also think it may sort of change I wonder if it changes the calculus about homework, about what kind of work is done at home versus what kind of work is done in the classroom with supervision, with guidance.
About the classroom flip.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I pick you back up?
Sure.
Go ahead, man, yeah.
I'll probably have more.
No, sorry.
No,
You
not yet.
go, because I may be
No, just,
following up.
piggybacking off of that last comment. This absolutely has the potential of reducing lecture time in the classroom, right? And say, hey, students, go learn about earthquakes, right? And if I look at the first article, I don't understand it. I'm like, well, let me regenerate it, or let me say, can I dumb it down for me a little bit, or make it a little bit more basic? And then you can dedicate more classroom time to discussion, to practicums, to, more hands-on teamwork building exercises that are based on the knowledge that you acquired on your own. This does seems to shift the burden away from the classroom onto more students and
can I build on that
Go
even
ahead.
farther? There's another flip here that I think might be necessary in order to address this, which is it's not just about flipping when instruction when content is absorbed versus when it's practiced. But I think there's a motivation flip, right? Where instead of trying to we need to set up our relationship with our students so that they are pulling knowledge, not having knowledge pushed to them. Because if the sense is you're having knowledge pushed to you and now you need to regurgitate that, then there's gonna be a lot of incentive. Oh, I'll just throw it in ChatGPT, right? Whereas if the motivation is really, I want to achieve something, and to do that, I'm going to have to go learn some new skills. I'm going to have to go learn some new knowledge, and I will have to synthesize that and create something that's truly new, then that changes the motivation. It might reduce the temptation to just, well, I'll just throw it into the AI.
Neil,
I don't know if this follows exactly on what Josh said, but one of the things that I see is, and I listened to a podcast, I sent it around to people about AI in general, not education. I'm sorry, I didn't send it to you too, I can't. But and it was on the media, on WNYC and Clark. And one of the things that we talked about is what I see AI doing is taking, as you said, scraping the internet, putting together a product, whether it's a written product or an image based on the knowledge, I put those words in quote, that the machine has. But that doesn't teach critical analytical skills. What AI and this major is take a question, change part of the question, have a different result come out, and therefore ask students to discuss, analyze, dig deeper into what each of those are, and then build off of them, that to create, in essence, their own product. So what I see is as both an opportunity and a challenge. It's an opportunity to use a tool to allow students to, and enable students to hone their critical analytical skills. And to then be able to incorporate the thing that this podcast said doesn't have, which is perception. Because everything is here, you give them a question, but how does that relate to your perception? Your perception of an emotion, your perception of a visual. And then how does that get incorporated into the product? So those are the kinds of skills, going back to our guiding questions of what we want students to be able to do and achieve in the world. And the challenge that I see is how students and staff can understand how to use these tools. So that's my.
I just like adding on to your point, and then this also like ties into the points that were made about flipped classrooms is, you bring up a really good point about how, I mean, at its core, no matter like how much it learns and is, people think it's sentient, it's still Chat GPT and stuff like that. At its core, it's still the typical machine, it's input, output. And there's a reason that students still, even when they can learn everything online, still prefer in-person classes and small class sizes, is because there's just the intangible thing about being human that we can't ignore. It's like, I mean, I feel like just like in society in general, I feel like there's a lot of stuff that could be more automated and just person and AI robot more than it already is. But I feel like we've intentionally haven't gone as far as we could technically go, because people still need like just to be with a human. There's just something there that AI doesn't have.
so Molly, would you consider that? Would you consider that an opportunity because it almost highlights
Yeah,
kind of
that's
the opposite side of this, right? Excellent.
that's what I was thinking.
Thank you, Sarah.
So what I've been thinking about is that in terms of the opportunity is being able to use it in a classroom and showcase it to students in a way that it's clear that it is a tool. It's just like one of many tools in your toolkit. And to Molly's point, right, it's doesn't what makes us different and what makes being in a personal classroom different is that we all do have, right, the capacity for empathy, and we have the capacity to be able to relate to each other on a personal level. And so, but this isn't something that's going away. It's just going to keep increasing and showing up in more places. So providing that experience for students to understand how to use it as a tool and understand what it can do and what it can't do will be important as they go out into the world, right? So understanding what the limitations are and being able to harness it to your benefit, and instead of the position that I think so many people are taking of it's like, oh, people are just gonna use this to like cheat, or they're gonna use it to like, you know, to take a shortcut. And not positioning it that way, but positioning it as something, as a tool that you can use to help you clarify your thoughts, to help you like get on a starting point. But that's my thought.
Oh, you were going, yeah, go ahead.
Well, just to build on what Sarah was saying, like, as an opportunity, it's just another opportunity to find source material. Like, if you're a student and you're starting looking for a starting point, and the angst, to your point, Josh, like, I have teenagers who, you know, are dealing with writer's block and the mental frustration of all of that, to have like a jumping off point via a tool like this. It's a source that you would consider the same way that you would vet any other source that you would find. The same challenges we found when we had students Googling, you know, information and having to teach them that certain things have to be vetted and certain websites have to be vetted, and not everything that they read on the internet. Or teach your parents that too. Yeah. So I think the opportunity in that is that it's a good source material, and I think there might be a mental health impact for some students because that angst is real. I have questions about how this all plays out in math, because it has math capacities, and we've only been talking about it in terms of essay writing. I don't know how that does, but I do agree with you to the extent that students are then pulling knowledge instead of being, you know, handed sources or knowledge is being pushed on them. This is an interesting opportunity.
I have some thoughts about the math aspect. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, just make
Mary,
that
why
so
don't you
that,
go and
well, I was thinking of the words like the old encyclopedias, you know, like it's almost like a customized encyclopedia where, you know, you don't just look up one word or whatever, you just ask it lots of questions until it finally comes up with like what you're actually looking for. But like you're saying, it's a source, right? And it's a customized source, maybe based on your questions, and you can keep asking follow-ups, which is great, which you can't do in an encyclopedia necessarily, you know, as easily. I guess you have to flip around a lot. But it's interesting how I feel like that's taking us back to like what we did as kids, you know, we had to go to the library and look up stuff, you know. So yeah, I was thinking like it's a personalized or customized book, kind of for you to take. And then the other thing I was thinking was maybe it's an opportunity to think about the teaching practices, you know, I think in moving away from some of the traditional practices that don't work anymore, you know, I think might teach, it might encourage teachers to innovate on teaching, you know, some of those same skills, right? Like you still need to be able to read, you still need to be able to write, you need to be able to look at the text and know whether it's written well, you know, or a poem, like how would you know the haiku is if you didn't learn that, you know? But it would, instead of teaching in the traditional methods and evaluating and assessing, the opportunity might be to push those teaching practices into a different level.
Just to piggyback on what you're saying, in one of the articles that I was reading in prep for this, it was talking about how, right, it had the potential to increase differentiation in a classroom as well, and to allow a teacher to provide more individualized supports for students without it being an undue sort of planning burden as well. So it gives them some jumping off points to increase differentiation for students.
And that's kind of what Omar said too. I hadn't thought of that, you know, but when he said you could kind of say dumb it down, or, you know, maybe not in those words, but you can have it at the different levels that people are open to receiving. Yeah.
Or more complex, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Although that does raise a question of its limitation. You ask it, write a poem on a particular subject. There are certain constructs, right, in that poem, which you saw, rhyme, meter, But we know from poetry that poetry is much broader than that.
Mhm.
And how will, since the inputs, what's scraped is not to write kind of a Lawrence Ferlinghetti poem
You have to
in
ask
that
it.
style. Well, you could, I guess, right, in the style of,
You have to
So
say it.
you absolutely could
We
ask.
didn't
it.
yeah,
ask
I
that
guess you're right.
You can ask it.
You're right, but then you need to know. The
Well, that's it.
students
That's the
need
whole
to know,
point.
and I guess
Need to know.
that comes back to, you need to know that, and I would guess the other point on the math that was mentioned seems to me as well. That, yes, you can see what the answer to a math solve, give me the solve, to solve this geometry proof.
Mhm.
But how do you know as the student how that was done and whether that is correct and whether that is the only way or the best way to get to your solution? That comes
Yeah.
once again to perception and that's the thing that I think we need to inculcate if we're gonna use, this tool.
One of the things that, sort of I've been noticing when I interview interns and very junior folks in hiring is that a lot of math, and I don't think this is totally the case here, but in math instruction is much more formulaic than I remember it being when I studied math. Now, admittedly, I was in an advanced math program, but I kind of noticed that I can push someone on their math skills only to a certain point before they run out of the formulas that they remember. Or they run out of the recipes, not necessarily the formulas, but the recipes that they remember. Like, this is the recipe for solving two equations of two unknowns. This is the recipe for doing this kind of a geometry problem. This is the recipe for doing that kind of a problem. And I think this puts even more pressure on us as an educational institution and educational institutions in general to teach the thinking skills that support math, the logic skills, it actually puts more onus upon us to do more proof-based kind of stuff than, well, this is how you solve two equations and two unknowns, and this is how you solve three equations and three unknowns.
Right?
Right.
As long as you have our foundation, then I absolutely agree.
Yeah. Because assuming you do need to have that foundation, they certainly need to have the foundation of arithmetic, and they need to have the foundation of basic mathematical skills. But I think this kind of puts us in a point where we need to, that there's less value in memorizing those, go-to techniques and more value in understanding the little bit more theory and critical thinking around it.
And it's interesting that you bring that up because that has been the trend. It's not always it doesn't always achieve the outcome, right? But the shift in standards and the way we think about instruction, right? And you wonder, will this be the impetus that really helps to hit that home, right? And solidify that.
Yeah.
So, any other lingering opportunities before we shift to challenges, Anna?
Just in this conversation, the one opportunity that's standing out to me is the opportunity that our students would have to actually work with this. If this is the future and this is a tool that's going to be available to them in college, they should, I think, be given the opportunity to work with it, to learn the nuance of it, to find out how to get it to give you the information or to pull the information that you're looking for while they're still, under the tutelage of our amazing educators who have their best interests at heart. I would think instead of shielding them from it and then throwing them into the world to figure it out on their own.
Or setting it up as like some sort of like taboo thing. where
Right.
It's like this thing that you're not supposed to look like it is there in the world and it is going to increasingly be there. So.
Right. And to Mrs. Fiorini's point, with respect to what you were saying about like, spitting out an answer to a question, like we would hope that we would give them the opportunity to understand that that's not their motivation for doing well on I don't want to say test, an assessment, thank you. That you would want the assessment to reflect your actual knowledge and to use this as an effective tool to.
There were times as a
Gain that
chemistry
knowledge.
teacher
Yeah.
that I told my students, put the calculators away.
Mhm.
Like, brings me to calculators,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, and what was the impetus behind that, right? Because, and the rationale, the pedagogical strategy was, I want them to focus on process,
Mhm.
right? And the true learning is in the process.
But and what that says is, okay, you've got the proof, so now let's tell us, why is that?
You got it.
And that may result in a change in teaching practice.
yeah.
And it may also result in a reconsideration of what's taught at the younger grades.
Mhm.
Because I don't know when, where those foundations, as we talked about, have to be, honed, provided, honed, et cetera.
Could have implications for order of instruction.
Sure,
Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah, Theo.
So this is kind of on another subject, but I was playing with the program and I wrote hablas español, and it replied, sí, hablo español. So I speak Spanish. What can I help you with? And then this is all in Spanish, and I wrote, my son got homework and I don't understand it. And the thing says, I understand. Can you give me more detail? So what difficulty you're having so I can better help you? I can also help you find online resources that could help you understand your kid's homework.
Wow.
And then I wrote, and I wrote in English, please write an essay about your favorite animal, be specific and include detail. And then it says in a paragraph exactly what is intended from that piece of homework in Spanish. So it says, include details about habitat, behavior, diet, like as examples of detail. And then I say, thank you very much. What should I do in the future if I if I need help for my kids' homework? And it says, you're welcome. I'm happy to help you. And then it gives 4 different things that you can do, from speaking to your teacher to utilizing online resources to getting other external resources. And then at the end, it says, it's important to, in all in Spanish, it's important to recognize that everyone learns differently. And it's normal to need extra help, not only for kids, but also for adults.
So this is a community opportunity too.
Am I sensing a personality there?
What was strange to me, that
Yeah.
last line,
Yeah.
like
The
really was not only
There's
just like.
I agree.
Empathy.
Yeah, there was a desire to connect and empathy. And so I'm very conflicted about this because I'm kind of astounded by how helpful it was. And I've also I've argued often historically in my work that technology shouldn't be the only option for inclusive, because a lot of folks go to, like, we're talking Google Translate or automated things, and I in thinking about students as well, I thought about the potential for this tool kind of creating or worsening isolation in young people, right? Like, because they have this thing to connect with, right? And so, and this maybe goes into challenges, is like, I would want this parent to like use this as an initial step and not the whole solution for like, oh, parents can now use chat.
Or an emergency, right, but not like
Right.
a.
It should be a piece of like a broader strategy, right? For this parent who has no idea how to help their kid with homework, right? But I'm just astounded by how accurate and helpful it was.
I'd love to know how many other languages it can convey that at the end.
So this is the perfect segue to,
Great point. Yeah, just
Can
right
we-
before
yeah.
you jump in.
Absolutely.
It's a great point, because everything that we've been talking about is using the tool just as that, as a tool to aid in learning, right? It is not supplementing any of my effort. I think that's where now we're talking about
Yeah, we
challenges,
could, I think it's a perfect segue into challenges.
because that's one of the challenges, right? How do you
Yes.
just not restrict, but utilize the tool again as a way to enhance learning and not against to supplement my own personal effort of saying, okay, just produce this article, let me copy and paste it and submit it. Right, so how do we, and it has to be, there are tools now that kind of catch whether it's what percentage of the essay was written by AI. But going back to the ethics and the academic integrity, encouraging students to use this appropriately. And what checks and balances can we put in place on that?
Could be updating our code of ethics to reflect the impact of this technology on what our students could potentially do with it.
I mean, we have middle schools,
What?
we have middle schools, they're
Yeah.
gonna be doing this,
I mean,
right?
I mean, would a teacher not know?
well, but the article
After a
talk
while, I
about
mean, I
that.
could
Well,
get maybe one essay, like, I don't know.
But
Like,
then
would it-
that's,
Eventually, I mean, if you're an English teacher, let's say you're teaching how to write to kids, right? Like, you probably have more than just. You're evaluating more and assessing more than just.
But again, there are
Taking in
tools
papers,
that
I guess.
tell
I
you
don't
how, again, what percentage of the writing was generated by
Well, that's
AI,
interesting.
right?
but that, I mean, this goes to my question that I threw up on the board, like, how will our teachers find the time to revamp how they teach, not like what they teach, but how they teach, because some of the articles talk about then teachers' time being consumed with processing essays to detect AI, like,
Yeah,
are we really gonna ask our
Different
teachers to
from
do
I
that?
think it's a whole different practice or something. I don't know. There's some, maybe it hasn't been thought of yet about.
And
how
this
to-
is.
They're already doing that because they're already running things through Turnitin,
Right.
But Turnitin is looking
I don't know
for
what-
plagiarism,
looking for plagiarism, but. you
right,
know,
but this is not
I
plagiarism,
understand that,
and so now.
but now they're
it's a whole
it's
nother
a
level.
whole nother level, but it's the same kind of.
I do believe there was a situation where they put some of this work through Turnitin and there was no plagiarism detected.
Right.
Because it's original content.
Yeah, it's original
But
content.
I do, and it's interesting, it goes back to Mary's point, right? Of this will have to make us reevaluate in a lot of ways, some of these practices, right? It's the way we teach, the way we assess, possibly. It's hard
But
to
not
catch,
replacing.
correct,
those fundamentals.
correct, yeah.
But I guess my question is,
Just like teaching.
Yeah.
is a challenge.
Mhm.
Our teachers are already so taxed
Yes.
with respect to everything that they're doing. Like, I guess my question or the challenge is how are we going to find time to allow our teachers to change the way they teach to accommodate this and its impact on education?
I think the good news with that, right, is that that's what, as educators, we do that, just
Sure,
naturally, we
sure.
have to do that, right? But I think this is a perfect place to pause and say, how incredible is it that in this room, we're having this conversation, right? Like, that's impressive to me. I'm soaking it all in. I'd like to go out on a limb and say we're probably one of the only districts in the area that's actually tackling this right now already, right? And that's where it begins.
It
So,
was everywhere this week.
yeah.
Everybody
it's
was
all over
talking
the
about
news, right?
it was
really popped, yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, you were so timely in this conversation. I will say that because literally the articles that you sent us, not only were they recent, but there was everything else was popping this week with respect to this.
Speaking of challenges, if I could just interject a piece for commentary, what are the thoughts on these schools that just shut it down? Like, do you think that's the appropriate response to
I
this?
think they're trying to soak up the ocean with a paper towel.
Yeah, it's not effective.
But it's also, I think, one of the things you said, and I think that I'll throw a couple of challenges. One is the equity or equitability challenge. Equitability both within our district and those who may not have the resources on direct students. Equitability in this educational system where we're maybe talking about this, but there are many other districts and who can't have anything to do with this because the kids will have no comprehension. My nephew, I'm talking about this with him on Sunday. And one of the things he teaches in a lower or low middle income, mainly Hispanic community in New Jersey, near Patterson, teaches in high school history. And his student body would have no conception of what this is about is teachers, because of the stresses they're under, will have very little conception. They will not be able to, I don't believe from what he says, incorporate this into their practice, into their learning, and get the support of their administration and their school boards, and perhaps even their state board of education, to be able to do this. And then when we talk about equity, right, in the largest system, are we creating a greater, different haves and have-nots? The other part to it, which I think is a challenge, is thinking about the various pathways that students will go from our district and elsewhere when they leave here. Whether they're going to go to a 4-year college, they're going to a 2-year institution, whether they're going to go into a technical or trade, whether they're going to go in the military, where they're going to confront or be faced with AI in very different uses and very different needs for wherever they're going to be in work after college. And we need to prepare all of our students with the knowledge, skills, experience to succeed wherever they're going. And I don't want to, I don't think we should focus this on just, the high achieving student body that we may perceive we are serving, because we have a lot of students here who are not necessarily going in that direction. And we have to be cognizant of that. So that to me is a challenge. I will add that everything that is an opportunity, you can kind of flip it to a challenge, and everything that's an opportunity, a challenge, you can flip it to a question. So
I mean,
Sure.
that's the thing, isn't it? Oh, sorry. No. But I feel like it really does tie back to intrinsic motivation, and that can tie into equality because there are so many different uses for it. So it's not just like what the uses are, but how and why students are using it. You can either use it in a way that helps your learning or in a way that hinders your learning. And it all depends on if students have the motivation going into school. And that stems from so many other things like your home life and stuff like that. And that if we're really putting the burden on teachers to just like catch the cheating and make sure that kids are doing X, Y, Z, I feel like it's already too late, because it should be focusing on making sure that all kids go into school wanting to learn, like from a young age. And there's a lot of things that go into that, and that gets complicated, also probably expensive. So that's why people don't want to think about it.
Other challenges.
I think there's one of the greatest challenges here is bad fitting data. That is, if the AI, if the machine learning system is fed with data which is inaccurate, is biased, it's going to give out data that is inaccurate and biased. We already see that where you find, if you want to have fun, go and do a Google search for why is the sky blue? 2/3 of the answers are incorrect. Right now.
Well, it's
So let's see what they say. Because
Let's do a chat GPT.
they're scraping all that
I think
stuff.
it goes back to my point too about
Yeah.
like this just being source material and you still have to vet and.
Right.
You have to be. The difference, I think the threat here though, is that when it's written out in an essay form, that is, it feels more correct than it might when it's just one out of 12 results that you got back in your Google search for why is the sky blue. It's giving you a single result in the form of an essay saying the sky is blue because of refraction, which by the way is wrong. It's actually really scattering, but that's okay.
Right, if it's written in a way
Well,
that
that's
seems
what people
plausible,
said.
then yeah.
All right, we got better then.
Yeah, I mean, I think Google has gotten better at just like seeing which
Yeah.
answers are actually correct. I don't know how, sorry.
No, you're fine. I would just say that I think one of the challenges that we're gonna face as a district then is if we are going to be dealing with this and the access to this in middle school and in the high school, is shifting the focus on the basics earlier in the elementary years, because you really have to have those foundations set to be able, like, you're looking at source material and be able to discern source material as opinion or fact much, much earlier than you would absent this technology. So I think that's one of the challenges, is the impact it's going to have on earlier education, given how quickly this is all going to pick up as soon as they hit middle school. And I wonder,
I mean,
Well, and it'll.
I wonder how that, I mean, that sounds like a challenge. No, and our district isn't up to, take on, but it does sound like a
yeah,
challenge.
it's a great question. You have a tool that potentially can be more efficient at imparting learning,
Yeah,
right? Do you now carve out time from the classroom to say, hey, let's everybody go ask your question, let's come back for discussion? Do you move around the school schedule, the daily schedule
yeah.
to accommodate some of this happening in the classroom as opposed to at the home, right?
Or stress the
Um,
importance of understanding opinion versus fact.
And
Mhm.
absolutely, yeah. But again, to your point, you need to have that foundational knowledge. I mean, as we were going through in the beginning, Sarah pointed out, that's one long, run-on sentence,
Yeah.
right? You need to have that background to know that that's a long.
But that was the human generated one.
No, but my point is, you enough to make that determination, right? And then AI isn't the be all and end all of learning. You need to have some prerequisite knowledge before you end up using the tool.
Well, it's
Um,
like handmade pottery versus grown pottery or something like that. Like you can
Yeah.
see the imperfections. Right.
And run-on sentences might be frowned upon in how we write today in English, but that's not necessarily the case in all languages, and it's not necessarily the case in all periods of English writing.
But just another challenge on AI in general is the over-reliance on it. Right, and it goes back to foundational knowledge, like if we become so reliant upon it, and you're a surgeon and you nick an artery, you can't pause surgery and go ask an AI what to do, right? If you're in a corporate boardroom, you're presenting, somebody asks a question. Yeah, but if you're interacting with humans, somebody asks a question, you can't pause, say, hold on, let me think about that, let me look it up and get back to you.
I also worry about the opposite, which is there's an alternate risk, which is to not use it. You know what I'm saying? The number of times we've all been in the experience where somebody just goes and speaks something, and then like 20 minutes later, after the meeting, you get this, I said this, but I was wrong. I was an idiot.
But I think that's the biggest challenge, right? Finding that balance, right? Where is that balance?
I would just say another challenge is maybe finding the professional development time to, along with all the other professional development that our amazing teachers take on to do this. And I know that you said that you do this as teachers, but I do think that this is going to be uncomfortable for some people and very easy for like new, fresh, young teachers.
And first year
and
teacher
there-
saying,
yeah.
help me develop a curriculum.
I don't know. I just wanted, under the umbrella of all that, it seems like a challenge. Again, not one that we are not up to.
So what I'd like to do now is shift to the questions, and we'll kind of break a little bit of the protocol here. I'd like each of you, if you feel comfortable doing this, to get a little think time to think of a question. We'll just kind of round robin those questions. And then the last part of this discussion portion of the protocol, before we turn it over to our presenters to reflect, is the suggestions piece. And I'm actually going to advise that we kind of refrain from suggestions, considering this group tends to set policy, right? And we're not asking for that right now. So I'd like to stay away from that piece of it, just to preserve that aspect of this group. So we'll kind of end with a round robin of questions. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes of just individual think time. If you want to jot something down, and then we'll just bounce around and then we'll turn it over to our presenters to reflect. So then we'll do a clockwise rotation.
There, you never go first. Because you're the board president and you're always so gracious, I think.
So you're gonna put me on the spot? That's how that works.
Because I like you.
I don't know, I guess just reflecting on all of this is, what I wrote was, and I don't know if this is the kind of question you were looking for, was how do we encourage learning with and about AI in a way that helps students throughout their lives versus providing a shortcut that takes away foundation skills?
That's a good question.
Great question.
Molly,
Oh, okay.
and if you feel, you're not ready, you don't have a question, feel free to pass, no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. I'll just- Okay, I was gonna say, sort of how do we like combine incorporating, how do we like balance incorporating AI into our education without totally centering education around this one new technology that's gonna change? Like how do we make, how do we make sure that, we don't rely too much on it basically, because it is something like we're talking about, like it can literally change at any time. So how do we incorporate it, but like focusing still on the skills that are never going to go out of style, like, critical thinking and stuff. Like, yeah.
Thank you.
I got it. That was great.
Thank you.
I mean, I had a similar thing around how like learning and teaching how AI itself is created could be a very kind of interesting thing to understand. And then like similar to the conversation here, we've touched on so many aspects of like from, math to philosophy to literature, right? Like, and it seems like it could be just like a really great prompt for people to think about these strands, for students to think about these strands. So, but like, I guess it's not really a question, but I guess the question there is like, how do we go about that? Where do we start? How young? What are the right? When are students at like an optimal place to really think about these things in different ways and at a different level? So that's generally my question.
Thank you. Josh.
So how can we encourage, enable, and empower teachers who have decades of experience teaching the way that they teach now to shift instruction from the push model to an inquiry and discovery-based model where the impact of AI can be supportive of skills acquisition rather than an escape route bypassing learning?
Thank you. Mary.
I should almost say ditto. I think you said it pretty much more eloquently than I'm gonna, but I think it's a similar theme. And it's one we've been talking about before, but how do we encourage and support teachers in innovating their teaching and assessment practices of fundamental skills to accommodate the introduction of AI?
Thank you. Omar.
Yeah, my question is, how can AI be used as a tool to enhance the academic experience? And as a follow-up to that, what are the parameters we can use to ensure its appropriate use application?
Thank you.
So my question is how we get buy-in or how we effectively communicate with our entire community, our students, our parents and caregivers and our educators and administrators, how we effectively communicate with them to get a buy-in of embracing this and not being fearful of it. And maybe inform them
Thank you.
in an effective way.
Yeah.
I have two.
You get one.
I get one, and then when you do the next round on the round robin, if it gets back to me, I'll give you the second.
Go for both.
Go for both now.
Go for both.
How does our district ensure that students develop and utilize critical analytical skills so that they use AI to enhance their education rather than simply being reliant on it? Which is similar to what others have said. And my other one is, how does our district ensure that students have equitable access to the benefits of AI?
Presenters, it's your turn.
Right, so speaking of run-on sentences.
We've been taking notes.
I'm taking a shared notes document, that's one big essay.
That happens.
So we won't share all of the takeaways, just some of the salient points that we're having a back and forth about in the silent conversation. So I think in terms of sort of larger implications for the system as a whole, there's some really big takeaways about thinking about how we even organize the types of subjects and courses we teach. So initially, when we're talking about this, we're thinking about, okay, within math class, how do we harness and use this? How do we change our assignments? But some of what you've been talking about, some of the questions you have, are making us think about, does this actually have potential to further our work in interdisciplinary planning and actually thinking about what types of courses and what types of content we're starting with. And that also relates to the question and comments that have come up about things like the daily schedule. How do we think about the structures we have in place to make space for this type of learning that AI could theoretically enhance, rather than just sticking in the buckets that we already know, the silos that we already know and working within them. Also thinking a lot about the writing process itself and the learning process, making a connection to the high school building planning council, where one of the students shared that this actually could fundamentally change writing instruction, but in a good way, because they often spend a lot of time on that first draft and never do a lot beyond that. When you get to we talk about revision, we talk about editing, but often you just move on to the next thing. So they talked about that actually being one of the most challenging parts of doing any kind of writing, and they don't spend a lot of time there. So AI could actually help them focus more in that area.
It sounds like some of the things that we need to teach are big picture, design, logic, empathy, meaning as motivation. And does this give us opportunities to design the types of courses and learning experiences around these larger ideas rather than specific content areas? And that also plays into what Laura was talking about with interdisciplinary studies. If you're taking a course on entrepreneurship, you're learning all of the different facets that go into that, the business, the math and business, the art and the design, and so on, and thinking about these larger issues and topics that you all brought up. Also thinking about why and how are students using this, as Molly brought up, the intrinsic motivation. Is that something that we're going to think about our grading and how that can promote, how we can promote a growth mindset in our grading and our course offerings, and how we can make students more passionate about the subjects that they're taking and that they choose to take, or that how can we allow them to fulfill their requirements in areas that they're really interested in. And our grading takes a piece of that, because if they're cheating because they want a particular grade, or they're cheating because they just want to get the assignment over with, how can we modify our grading practices to eliminate those challenges? Another thing we talked about, finding professional development time. We're not experts in this, right? It's new. It's new to all of us. So we're sharing our experiences and what different teachers are doing and borrowing, right? That's always been something in education forever, is borrowing ideas and adapting them. But I also think as we focus on our guiding questions as a district, we are moving towards this in our practices as a whole, because we are thinking about being future focused, passion driven, equitable. All of these things are at the forefront, and we're moving in this direction. And if we latch on to this idea and pull it along with us, we're already going there. So as far as the time to revamp, yes, it does take time and there's no denying that. But it fits in with what we're doing anyway. And so it's another piece of that puzzle.
I think for my last two things are just, there's so much more, but I think, I'm leaving feeling a very strong sense of responsibility to harness this to be more equitable, because I think we've heard it could really go either way. It could create more inequities or it could have this huge potential as an opportunity. And I think that's a big responsibility that we have to keep in mind to make sure that we don't lose sight of this, even as we're focusing on curriculum and all the wonderful possibilities. Could easily go in the other direction. And I think there's a really interesting, I don't know if tension is the right word, but that's how I'm kind of seeing it, between the order of when you learn things. I think someone used that phrase. So question that came up for me from what everyone shared is, do students need to have all of the basic skills and inputs to use this well? Is there a certain level of input you need to use it well? And or do you learn some of those basic skills, some of that foundational knowledge of content areas through doing the new types of courses, tasks, and projects that we create? So I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's a system-wide tension to explore. There's lots more.
Because there's one observation from a word that fears philosophy. And that keys into what you talked about in terms of transdisciplinary courses. Because there's a whole wealth of things that we don't really deal with in schools, which is philosophy, concepts of philosophical thought, which, is something that you might do later, but that keys in very well to a transdisciplinary model. Just an observation I have from what has been said. The other thing, though, I think, is grading, right? And assessment and grades, because if we're talking about a true educational experience that is transdisciplinary, we would be best to move away from discrete grades for discrete courses. And how can we do that? How will we maybe be permitted to do it or become a pilot to be able to do that in a way that we further our objectives?
We're not like going in order at this point, are we? We're sort of doing whatever. Okay. I guess I have a couple things. I'm gonna, we'll try to keep them short. My first question kind of goes along, you got me thinking, Dr. Dubek, when you were talking about responsibility. I don't know, and I've just been thinking in general, when I first heard about ChatGPT, I started thinking like one of my friends has learning disabilities that make it really hard for her to do like anything related to math. And I was thinking like, oh my God, ChatGPT could help you do stuff that you need math for in your daily life, like your taxes. But I think that brings up an important question of trust. Should we be teaching kids that they can like trust something as important as their taxes with this like technology that's like potentially flimsy? And like, to what extent do we want to teach kids to rely on these technologies? And also another question I had was also relating to equality, and I'm wondering, because right now I feel like, at least for like the past like decade, maybe like decade-ish, or for like as long as like I've been like in the education system, I feel like the whole thing has been teach the kids to code. Obviously, that's like code.org. I remember doing that in like third grade, and I was like, yeah, we taught kids how to code, they're gonna be successful. I feel like for a long time it's been, someone like, it's like a kind of like a bunch of tech bros who think they can like learn how to code a bit, and then suddenly they think they're the best thing to ever grace the earth. So watching them kind of have like a meltdown over this has honestly been pretty funny. But I was just wondering, raises the question, what with this technology, what's gonna be like the new coding skill? What's gonna be the new skill that kids are gonna have to know? And
Everybody's
Is
gonna
that
know how to
gonna-
write bad code.
yeah, and then so then how can we make sure that like, certain like people and groups and like school districts aren't left behind and that, yeah.
I think the big question above my head right now is how do we instill intrinsic motivation in our students, to quote Molly, to quote Molly. That's like, I'm gonna go home and Google that, right? I'm not gonna chat.
Yeah.
Yes, that's-
It's knowing when to use what tool, the same thing as a calculator, like. Kids don't necessarily have to be motivated to choose, it's like relevant based on the situation, like if you're learning about how to add 2 + 2, you should do it, like if you're later on, you can use your calculator,
Yeah,
so.
but just even from the perspective that we're talking about, like revamping assessments or revamping like what motivates students.
What motivates
Yeah.
kids to succeed on the soccer field?
Good question. Yes, like all of these things, I think we need to start
Right,
thinking about.
it's a very different conversation when you're out on the soccer field or on the basketball
Is
court
it?
or
It's success
or at the
achievement.
DI tournament.
But on a soccer field, it is, and certainly at this level, it is skills development as well as success. As well as the intrinsic feeling of
It has to
Having
keep
done the
coming
best I've
back
done.
to do it year after year.
Well, that's the
Right.
rigor, right? We just.
yes, it's all.
I mean, approach, like
Yeah.
mindset, trying to,
Yeah.
getting good at something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
doing something.
I get good at something, I get practice, so why did I continue to play clarinet for 20 years,
Make your
Your
parents
parents
get
get
better.
better. Less pain.
I'm a big proponent of
Well, we
learning by
did
doing,
it like that, right?
I'm sorry, repeat that?
learning by doing,
Right.
right? And I think what worries me about AI is somebody mentioned the over reliance,
You're not doing it.
right?
It's
You're
doing
not
it.
doing
for
it
you.
anymore.
Yeah.
Right? You Going back to your process, like put your calculators away, just go through the process, because that's how you learn how to think through.
I think it may change assessment in a really fundamental way. I think it may drive us more away from long form assessments and more towards oral, one-on-one kind of assessments, which frankly may end up being a little more subjective.
And not everyone's
Potentially.
strength,
Yeah.
to speak versus.
Yeah, exactly. But it may drive us there or may point us there to something that's a little more conversational.
We'll have a rubric for it, don't worry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
The last thing I'll say on this is that you mentioned about hiring practices, right? If you look at the job descriptions that are out there for executive level roles, the underlying theme is excellent communication, problem solving, team building, motivating skills, right? Those
Yeah.
are the skills that everybody's asking for and looking for. And done right, this has I think the opportunity to fundamentally embed that in the learning experience, right? So just imagine a scenario where you go, you learn something, you come home, the assignment is a group project or a classroom discussion or a presentation. That becomes the emphasis. That's what you're graded on, for
Yeah.
example, not the writing sample that you produced, but how you're able to articulate it and convince, your colleagues about a
It's a-
certain aspect of a project.
Yeah, and it does put greater emphasis potentially on group work
Yeah.
and collaboration and teamwork skills.
So I want everyone to take a deep breath. Now that's a work session. Before I let you leave, I just would add one more ask, going back to the district guiding questions and the one that I highlighted, almost forgot to highlight. And how the innovation team helps to fulfill the guiding question, especially on risk taking, right? Which all of you did in your own way tonight. What you think of the innovation team protocol and the experience?
That was fun.
Also,
It was fun. I just felt like there was a lot of good back and forth and people building off of each other. It was good that like there was a structure, but it wasn't like too structured.
thank you.
What allowed for risk taking, right? Like the protocol of just taking a minute to yourself and putting up the questions that are true to you and then being able to then collaborate with others and comment on their questions and learn from that and come back again. So then we came back again and we did like our the opportunities and like the opposite of opportunities.
Challenges.
There you go, challenges. I thought it was great. It allowed for risk taking. As somebody who's just coming in and having a conversation about something after having reviewed a set of material. Yeah.
So what I love, and it's a little bit of a cheat because I'm on the innovation team, so I've done this protocol more than once before. But what I love about tonight and our other meetings has been that the way that you really get to see a whole breadth of perspectives. Right, because I can read something and have my own thoughts about it, but the way that you can hear everyone's thoughts about it and hear just how many different perspectives there are on any given topic. And then looking at those challenges and opportunities. So I think it's refreshing and helpful.
Yes, that's the word that came to mind for me too. Less risk taking, I think. Maybe that's just by the nature of what we do. Like, but critical thinking, it really, I think, allowed to hear a lot of different perspectives that I never would have thought of on my own. So I appreciated that.
Could Chat GPT have done what we did tonight?
We need 7 of them.
Yeah, we should Google that. What's the school district do?
Describe itself.
Yeah,
Yoma is actually working, he's working in machine learning. That's what he's studying right now. And he's actually working on the thesis that he is writing right now is on adversarial algorithms. That where you have two different algorithms that compete against each other.
I mean, maybe, but then how do you interact with teachers? Like, how do you interact with the community? Like the personal reflection and elements, or if there is something that's unique to our district, would that make it into the body of the pre-2021 data set that like this, it wouldn't, right? So probably not, I guess.
Hopefully they don't start monetizing.
Yeah.
Yes,
And they don't have
advertising,
Molly.
you know what I mean?
They wouldn't have Molly and her perspective as a student every day in our district.
kudos, Molly.
Yeah, thank you.
Representing the student body.
I mean, that's like you bring up like sort of, I have a piggybacking tally I have to add to it. Piggybacking off of your point, looking at just like how, like what they can't replace about humans is the fact that, in our society, culturally, the way we communicate is always changing. Slang, the way we talk is literally always changing. So it's not like we're never going to need human generated content again, because then there's going to be a divergence, I feel like, between the way that people talk in real life and the way this AI talks. And it's going to be more and more noticeable. Like in 50 years, if we've had nothing but AI generated articles and TV shows and movies, which is really dystopian, it's like not gonna happen.
Oh, you don't mind.
You just made that. I'm speaking in emoji now.
We have a lot in our public, our students, our teachers, everybody has a lot of preconceived notions of this. Going back to like Colossus, the Forbin Project, or, movies from the 1940s and 1950s.
Omar just quoted the Terminator, so.
Matrix, you name it. There's way more dystopian fiction about AI than there is utopian fiction about AI. And
So that does lead to Anna's very fundamental question. What we are doing here tonight and what we are doing as you guys are doing as an innovation team, what we will be doing is explained to, and the word I don't like, stakeholders, everybody in the community as to exactly what it means, what its advantages are, that we realize the challenges. We are taking risks, appropriate risks, to go back to our guiding. What's that? Thoughtful risks, obviously, but appropriate risks because we see the potential for benefits and then people support that instead of reflexively think of it as a dystopian.
And that it's an
story.
ongoing process.
And
right?
it's
I
an
mean,
ongoing process.
It changes so often, something might happen where all of a sudden, there needs to be a different conversation about who knows,
Yeah.
like, right? But
Well, always a
Should be.
always a
Yeah, that's what I
conversation.
mean, it would
Because
be.
it is always changing.
So I want to thank you. Let's thank our presenters.
Yes, thank you very much.
And thank the board for allowing us to dive into this and for participating so fully. Absolutely. And anything or?
I just wanted to say, I wanted to say two things. One is, I kept thinking as I was kind of in the listening posture tonight about the importance of bringing back the fundamental question about what school is supposed to be. Right, and at the beginning and end of that story to me is it's about a trajectory and a journey of learning. That's about each individual and about us collectively. And I think there's going to be real importance in that conversation and thinking through what school can be and should be as it relates to all of the changes externally and how it impacts what happens within the system. And secondly, I hope, and we knew you'd have a good time with this, knowing the eight of you, but I hope that when you signed up to be a part of board leadership and gave up moments of your personal lives to come and do this work, I hope it was because you thought you'd have opportunities to have conversations like the one you had tonight. So I think anybody who's watching or will hear about it will see 8 tremendous, thoughtful, well-informed leaders grappling with something that all of us will be, but I think the community should feel very comfortable and confident in what they heard tonight from a really forward-thinking group of leaders, wonderful presenters, and an outstanding facilitator. So as to
Thank you,
echo Dr.
Dr.
Blair, that was a work
Thank you
day.
so much.
Before I close this out, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all for putting together this work session. I think this has been an incredible opportunity for us as a board to really sit and think about to connect ourselves with this, with what's going on in our schools and think about what our students are grappling with and it putting it in a real giving us some real quality time to think about those things. So I very much appreciate you guys taking the time to do this for us. This is just a really incredible evening. So
Might just add, expose the rest of the board to the method of the innovation team and your approach to, it could be used and transposed in other topics as they come up.
and to show the community what the innovation team does. So we'll be looking for innovation team members
Absolutely.
in the coming years. So, people want to engage in these kinds of conversations.
I would add that showing the community also what the process is, not only on this subject, but on a lot of subjects, as to how we, as a group, collaborate. And I'm talking about not just the board and administrators, but also with our students, with our staff, with our faculty, and with other members of the community who are part of this team and other teams, so that people understand, this is a district where we work as partners and collaborators. And I think people should be proud of our district in that regard.
What's next? What else do you think? What's next?
Well, we actually are looking forward to having our presenters present this topic and have the innovation team mill this topic, so that we can get an even broader perspective, right? So that's definitely next. And then we have some other ideas that have come up in terms of grading practices and equity. Correct? Am I saying that correctly? So that's on the horizon. And then just plugging, if there's any educators, community members, parents that would like to bring an issue for innovation to the team, we're always open to that.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
All right, well, recommended action, the Board of Education adjourns at 9:31 p.m.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstained, motion carries. All right. It was